She built an empire worth billions, but couldn't say 3 simple words to her own daughter. Behind the polished image of a powerful businesswoman was a truth she never wanted the world to see. At home, silence had become a prison. Her daughter was deaf, and every day the gap between them widened, not because of love lost, but because of a language she never took the time to learn. The boardroom feared her. Investors admired her. But at night she sat in the same house as her little girl, unable to bridge the most important conversation of all. "I'm here." "I understand. You're not alone." And just when it seemed too late, when resignation and regret felt permanent, a stranger stepped into their lives, shattering the silence in a way no one expected. This isn't just a story about business or family. It's about the moment one woman realized the biggest deal she'd ever make wasn't on Wall Street, but in the heart of her child. She could close deals worth billions, switching effortlessly between 5 languages in boardrooms from San Francisco to Singapore. Yet in the quiet of her own home, Callista Morgan stood powerless, watching her daughter slip further away into a silence she could not break. For 8 long years, she had promised herself she would master sign language, that she would learn to speak in the only language her child could understand. But the truth was brutal. She had failed. And on most days, that failure hurt more than any corporate battle she had ever fought. The city below glittered in morning light. From the 38th floor of her glass tower, San Francisco looked like a kingdom she ruled, gold sharp and untouchable. At 40, Callista was a name that carried both awe and fear across the West Coast real estate world. Her platinum hair pulled into a flawless knot, her ice blue stare, her immaculate suits, everything about her screamed control. Everything except the exhaustion she carried in those eyes. 8 years. That was how long it had been since a late-night phone call tore her life apart. The sterile white of a hospital corridor. A police officer's voice she couldn't forget. The impossible task of walking back into her house where a 2-year-old girl waited for a father who would never come home. Astrid hadn't had the words to ask why Daddy was gone, but she had felt it. And feeling was enough to carve a permanent absence into their lives. Now 12, Astrid was the delicate shadow of the girl Callista once dreamed she'd raise. She had her father's warm sapphire eyes, but her smile was rare, as if it cost too much to appear. A rare neurological condition had taken her voice before she ever truly used it, leaving her to navigate a world that rarely paused for silence. Doctors had once offered hope. Therapies, treatments, promises. But the years had told a crueler story. Astrid's voice would never come back. Callista, who had once bulldozed competitors in cutthroat negotiations, threw herself into sign language with the same ferocity. But the graceful rhythm of native signers always slipped beyond her reach. Conversations with Astrid often ended in frustration, half-formed gestures, misunderstood meanings, long stares across a widening gulf. Instead of pulling them closer, language had become yet another reminder of the distance between them. And that, more than any hostile takeover or billion-dollar gamble, was the battle she was losing. The buzz of the intercom cut through her thoughts. Gwen Harper's voice followed, warm and steady, the kind of voice that had anchored Callista for the past 5 years. Gwen was officially an executive assistant, but in truth she was the closest thing Callista had to a friend, though even that bond was kept carefully measured, never too close, never too messy. "Your 9 o'clock is here," Gwen announced, her tone carrying the subtle edge of someone who knew her boss's mind was elsewhere. And Yamamoto-san from Tokyo called again. He's uneasy about the rumors swirling around succession. You know how personal this is for him. His grandson communicates through JSL. There was a pause, then Gwen added softly. "Also, you promised Astrid breakfast at that new cafe on Valencia this morning." Callista's stomach sank. Yamamoto wasn't just another investor. He represented nearly 40% of their expansion capital, a man whose commitment to inclusive design came from something far deeper than profit margins. And she had forgotten again about Astrid, about the simple promise of breakfast. The guilt was instant, sharp, familiar. It lived inside her now, coiled like a constant shadow. "Tell Yamamoto-san I'll call him at noon Tokyo time," Callista said finally, her decision slicing clean like a deal on paper. "And cancel the 9 o'clock? So the 9. Gwen hesitated. "Just the 9? "No," Callista exhaled. "Cancel everything until noon." I'm taking my daughter to breakfast." There was a silence on the line, then Gwen's voice, gentle but edged with warning. "The board won't like this. Marcus Henderson's already been making noise about divided priorities." Callista's jaw tightened. Let him make noise. The words came out cool, decisive. But underneath, she knew the cost. She always knew the cost. 30 minutes later, Callista stood outside Astrid's bedroom door in their Pacific Heights mansion, a house far too large for two people who barely spoke. She knocked once, then stepped inside. Astrid was already dressed, perched at the window with her sketchbook. She looked up, surprise flickering across her face at the sight of her mother in casual clothes, not armor made of tailored silk and steel. Callista raised her hands, careful and deliberate. Breakfast date. For a moment, Astrid's expression cracked open. A smile bloomed across her face, sudden and dazzling like sunlight breaking through clouds. She nodded eagerly, grabbing her favorite purple backpack, its straps covered with hand-painted butterflies of her own design. For the first time in a long while, Callista felt like maybe, just maybe, she had chosen right. The cafe on Valencia was nothing like the cold perfection of their house. It was alive, buzzing with weekend chatter, the air thick with the smell of fresh coffee and maple syrup. Families crowded the wooden tables, conversations overlapping into a symphony of warmth. Outside, autumn leaves clung to the glass, glowing orange and crimson, like a stained glass window painted by the season itself. Callista guided Astrid to a corner table by the window. The girl wasted no time sliding her sketch pad out and sketching the maple leaves as they swirled in the morning breeze. Callista left her there while she went to the counter to order, but her eyes kept drifting back. Astrid looked so small at that big table. Other kids her age were leaning into their parents, trading stories, laughing. Astrid, meanwhile, stayed in her bubble of silence, her pencil the only voice she had. And the ache returned, that deep, relentless ache that reminded Callista of every way she was failing as a mother. The doorbell above the cafe chimed. A boy about 6 or 7 burst in, hair the color of sand, sticking out in stubborn tufts, wearing a sweater with a green dinosaur stitched across the front. In one hand, he clutched a stuffed triceratops that had clearly survived years of love. His father followed behind, tall, lean, wire-rimmed glasses, framing kind eyes, dressed in worn jeans and a flannel shirt that suggested comfort rather than ambition. Before anyone could stop him, the boy bounced straight over to Astrid's table, fascinated by her drawing. Callista froze. Instinct kicked in, protective and sharp. She was ready to step in until something unexpected happened. The man approached calmly, but instead of speaking, his hands moved, fluid, graceful, alive. He was signing, asking Astrid if his son could look at her drawing. And just like that, Astrid transformed. Her whole body seemed to light from within. Her hands flew rapid and confident, her movements filled with expression Callista had never seen from her. Gone was the hesitant, halting child Callista struggled to communicate with. In her place was someone radiant, articulate, alive. Astrid was telling him about the leaves, how no two were the same, how they were like snowflakes, like fingerprints. The man responded with equal enthusiasm, nodding his eyebrows, rising and furrowing his face, a canvas of nuance that gave every sentence rhythm and grammar. He was listening with his whole being, and Astrid was finally being heard. For Callista, watching from across the cafe, it was breathtaking and heartbreaking. By the time Callista returned with 2 steaming cups, Astrid was no longer the quiet, withdrawn child she knew. She was radiant, her hands alive, her eyes bright as if someone had unlocked a door inside her that Callista had been pushing against for years. The man looked up as she set the tray down. His voice, when he finally spoke, carried the soft lilt of the South. "I'm Elias Bennett." "And that's Oliver," he said, nodding toward the boy who was now happily adding crayon strokes to Astrid's sketch with her delighted permission. "I hope you don't mind him joining. He has this habit whenever he sees art, he can't stay put." Callista's gaze flicked to his hands, then back to his face. "How do you—" She gestured vaguely, the question unfinished but clear. Elias smiled and his hands moved almost unconsciously as he explained. "My mother taught at the California School for the Deaf for 30 years. I grew up signing before I could even talk. ASL was my first language. Mom used to say hearing people listen with their ears, but in deaf culture you learn to listen with your whole body. Oliver was now leaning close to Astrid, sketching a squirrel in the corner of the page. Astrid signed, eagerly explaining its size, its movements. Oliver, eyes wide, tried to follow her directions, giggling when she corrected him. Elias watched them with quiet pride. "She's incredible," he said softly, nodding toward Astrid. "Her vocabulary is advanced for her age. Look at her facial grammar, how she raises her eyebrows to ask a question, furrows them for emphasis. She isn't just signing, she's speaking, fluently." The compliment cut Callista in a way she hadn't expected, because she knew it wasn't because of her. Not really. "I'm still learning," she admitted, her voice low, her hands tightening around her coffee cup. "It's harder than I thought it would be. Some days it feels like I'm failing her." Elias turned to her, then his brown eyes warm, steady, and impossibly kind. "Every parent feels like that," he said. "Trust me, I know. Oliver's mom passed when he was 3. There are days I have no idea what I'm doing, but showing up, trying, that's what matters, not perfection." For a moment, Callista couldn't speak. She watched Astrid laugh, really laugh, as Oliver drew a ridiculous, oversized squirrel and held it up proudly. It struck her how rare that sound was, how rare that smile was, and how it had taken a stranger 5 minutes to reach a place she hadn't touched in 8 years. Her phone buzzed on the table, 3 missed calls already lighting up the screen. The world she'd built, the empire, the boardrooms, the capital, was tugging at her sleeve. But across from her, Astrid's world was opening, fragile and fleeting, waiting for her to decide which one she would choose. Her phone lit up again, buzzing across the wooden table like an impatient insect. 3 missed calls from the office, 2 from board members, and then a text from Gwen, blunt and merciless. "Photos of you at the cafe are on tech blogs. Henderson's calling an emergency meeting. Yamamoto wants answers now." The empire was crashing in headlines, rumors, billions on the line. All of it clawing at her, demanding she retreat back into the fortress she knew so well. Callista rose quickly, already half out of her seat. "I should go?" she said. Her tone clipped, her defenses snapping back into place. She glanced at Astrid, still laughing, with Oliver still alight with joy, and the contrast nearly broke her. "Thank you for talking with her." Elias stood too calm and unhurried, as though her storm didn't reach him. From his pocket he pulled a simple business card, white, unadorned, just a name and a number. "The class information's on here," he said, offering it to her. "No pressure, but Astrid would be welcome any time. Both of you would." Callista took it, the small rectangle suddenly heavy in her hand. She nodded once, then turned away, heels clicking against the tile, heart torn between 2 worlds. Behind her, Astrid's laughter rang out bright and unguarded, as if the universe had just given Callista a glimpse of the life her daughter could have. If only she found the courage to step into it. The week that followed felt like trench warfare. Tech blogs splashed her photo across headlines, distracted CEO Morgan Empire at risk. Henderson whispered to investors about instability at the top. Yamamoto's team scheduled late-night video calls, pressing for reassurances. Every corner of her carefully constructed world seemed to close in at once. But even in the middle of the chaos, her mind kept drifting back. Not to spreadsheets or projections, but to a cafe table, to Astrid's radiant smile, to Elias's hands moving with patience and ease. Thursday afternoon, Gwen walked into her office carrying a fresh coffee and a tablet glowing with yet another article. "They're calling you the absent CEO," she said quietly. "Marcus already has 3 board members backing a performance review." Callista stared down at her desk and realized she was holding something. The business card. Elias's card. Its edges were soft now, bent from her fingers turning it over too many times. "He teaches sign language," she murmured almost to herself. He talked to Astrid like it was the most natural thing in the world. She was happy, Gwen, happier than I've seen her in years. Gwen leaned forward, her voice firm but not unkind. "Then take her to the class." Callista looked up sharply. The Yamamoto deal. "We'll still be here Monday," Gwen cut in. "Your daughter's childhood won't. You've spent 5 years building walls around yourself, Callista. Maybe it's time to build a bridge instead." That evening, when she came home, Astrid was at the kitchen table with her nanny head bent over homework. The girl looked up briefly, then quickly dropped her gaze. The flicker of hope in Callista's chest dimmed almost instantly. She sat down beside her, lifting her hands. Careful, measured. Astrid, would you like to go to a sign language class this Saturday with other kids? The change was immediate. Astrid's eyes widened, her hands bursting to life. Could Oliver be there? Could they really go? Could they go every week? For the first time in years, Callista felt her daughter's excitement not as a reminder of her own shortcomings, but as a door opening. A door she was finally ready to walk through. Saturday morning arrived wrapped in fog. San Francisco looked like it had been swallowed whole by a gray tide rolling in from the Pacific. The community center in the Mission District stood out against the mist, a riot of color. Its walls painted with murals of hands in mid-sign frozen like living poetry. Callista felt out of place stepping inside in her designer jeans, surrounded by families of every shape, color, and background. But then she saw him. Elias stood at the front arranging visual aids while Oliver tangled himself in a banner that read, "Every voice matters, even silent ones." When Elias spotted her, his smile cut through the fog like sunlight breaking a storm. The class began, and it was nothing like Callista had imagined. 15 families, all stumbling, learning, laughing together. Elias wasn't just teaching vocabulary, he was teaching a culture, a way of seeing the world. ASL isn't English on the hands, he explained, demonstrating with precision. It's a spatial language. Notice how I place someone here. He gestured to his right and then referred back to them. My face doesn't just show emotion. It creates grammar. Callista found herself leaning in, caught between fascination and envy at how easily Astrid seemed to follow. Then break time came, and something unexpected happened. Astrid. Her Astrid, who for 8 years had been the quiet shadow at the edge of every group, suddenly stood up. She tapped the table sharply for attention, mimicking the way she'd seen Elias do it. The sound rang out, commanding, confident. Every child turned, and instead of shrinking back like she once would have, Astrid stepped forward. Her hands moved with a clarity and confidence Callista had never seen. She was organizing a game, a signing circle, a story told one gesture at a time. Each child would add a sentence in sign to build something together. But Astrid wasn't just playing. She set rules. You have to use classifiers, she signed firmly. Don't just fingerspell, show size, show motion. And your face, it has to tell the story too. Some of the younger kids hesitated. One boy, no older than 5, struggled to understand classifiers. Astrid knelt beside him, patient, showing how a flat palm could become a car, how 2 fingers could walk, how the speed of movement could tell as much as words. When he finally managed to show a bird flying over a house, his face lit up and Astrid's smile lit up the whole room. Callista's breath caught. She was watching her daughter transform in real time from silent observer into leader, encouraging, guiding, correcting gently. She wasn't just participating, she was belonging. Elias appeared at Callista's side, handing her a cup of coffee. His voice was soft, reverent. She's a natural teacher. Look how she slows down for the younger ones. How she adjusts her expression for clarity. She's not just teaching signs, Callista. She's teaching confidence, community, home. For the first time in years, Callista didn't feel like she was losing Astrid. She felt like she was finally seeing who her daughter really was. After class, the 4 of them wandered down the street to a tiny taqueria, the kind of place with chipped tables and salsa jars that tasted like fire and sunshine. Astrid and Oliver slid into a booth together, heads bent over the paper placemats as if they'd known each other forever. She signed instructions, he sketched them out in bright crayon strokes, and together they created a world only they could see. Callista sat across from Elias, watching the children, hardly believing this was her daughter, the same girl who had spent years behind invisible walls of silence. This feels different, Elias said simply, breaking into her thoughts. His tone was casual, but his eyes carried more weight. It does, Callista admitted, letting out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to lean back to soften. They watched the kids a moment longer before Elias spoke again, quieter this time. After Beth died, I promised myself Oliver would be enough, that I wouldn't need anyone else, wouldn't risk letting anyone else in. His voice faltered and his hands almost unconsciously signed the word for fear. But seeing him with Astrid, watching how happy he is to have a friend who accepts him completely, I realize I've kept him in a bubble too. A bubble built from my grief. Callista felt a jolt of recognition. She had her own bubble, hers and Astrid's, carved out of fear and silence, designed to protect but only isolating them further. She looked down at her hands, then back at him. I know that bubble. I've been living in it for years. The words came out raw, unfamiliar on her tongue. And I'm terrified of what happens if I let it break. Elias's gaze was steady, warm. Maybe being terrified is better than being alone. Astrid's laughter rang out then, full and unguarded, mixing with Oliver's giggles. It pulled both adults back to the table, reminding them why they were there. For a fleeting moment, Callista let herself imagine what life could look like if she stopped choosing fear. By Sunday evening, her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. A photographer had spotted them at lunch, and by nightfall, the photos were everywhere. CEO Morgan's new priority, romance over revenue. Henderson wasted no time. By Monday morning, he had summoned an emergency board meeting. Callista sat in her home office screens, glowing with market charts and headlines, the weight of her empire pressing down on her shoulders. Gwen arrived with folders, stacked high, her usual armor of strategy and efficiency. But this time, her words cut sharper than any data point. You can fight this the way you always have, Gwen said, laying out the files. PowerPoints, projections, aggression. She paused, then leaned in. Or you could do something different. Show them that letting people in doesn't make you weak. It makes you stronger. The next morning, the boardroom felt less like a meeting and more like a trial. The view from the 40th floor stretched across San Francisco, but Callista barely saw it. She faced a wall of men in identical charcoal suits, their expressions carved in disapproval. Marcus Henderson stood at the head clicker in hand, his voice smooth and poisonous. This is about optics, he declared as paparazzi photos filled the massive screen. Callista at the cafe with Astrid at the taqueria with Elias, even at Oliver's art show. Our investors want stability, not a CEO distracted by whatever this is. Call it what you want. I call it a midlife crisis. Murmurs of agreement rippled across the table. They didn't even bother to hide it. To them, her crime wasn't negligence. It was humanity. Callista listened still and silent, her fire building not from anger but from clarity. For years, she had fought to prove she was untouchable. But maybe what they needed to see wasn't perfection. Maybe it was truth. She stood. And this time, instead of reaching for graphs or charts, her hands began to move, signing, speaking, both at once. Gentlemen, she said, her voice steady, her hands fluid. Let me show you something you've refused to see. Callista stepped out from behind the long mahogany table. No slides, no rehearsed script, just her voice and her hands painting meaning into the air. 40 million Americans use ASL. She began signing each number as she spoke. That's 40 million potential customers our industry has ignored because we couldn't be bothered to speak their language. Add another 20 million family, friends, colleagues who interact with the deaf community every single day. As she spoke, she moved around the room, placing invisible people in different spaces, referencing them with her hands just as Elias had taught her. For the first time, the invisible became visible. You worry about optics, she said, her gaze cutting into Marcus. But while you were chasing appearances, I was uncovering opportunities. With a tap on her tablet, the screen filled with blueprints, buildings designed with visual fire alarms, videophone systems in every unit open, sightlines in lobbies and lounges so conversations in sign could flow across the room. She flipped to endorsements from disability rights groups, partnerships with deaf-owned businesses, revenue projections that outperformed current markets. This isn't distraction, she pressed. This is vision. A new way to see the industry we built our fortunes on. You call it weakness that I've been learning to communicate with my daughter. I call it the strength that lets me see what you can't. The room was still a silence thicker than any shouting match. Callista let it linger, then pulled up the last slide. It wasn't a chart or a number. It was a photo of her and Astrid at class, both laughing hands flying in mid-sign, surrounded by other families. This isn't pulling me away from my work, Callista said softly. This is the reason I do it. And if you can't understand that a CEO fluent in more than one language spoken or signed isn't a liability but an asset, then maybe you're not the board this company needs for its future. No one moved, not even Marcus. And then the screen in the corner flickered. A face appeared, Yamamoto-san joining from Tokyo. They had all but forgotten he was listening. Morgan-san, he said, his voice calm, deliberate, carrying the weight of billions. In Japan, we say the bamboo that bends is stronger than the oak that resists. You have shown you can bend without breaking. This is leadership. He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. Yamamoto Industries will increase our investment by 20% on the condition that your inclusive development initiative moves forward. And Henderson-san, his gaze shifted like a blade across the table to Marcus. Perhaps it is time you too learn a new language. The silence that followed was no longer hostile. It was surrender. For the first time in years, Callista felt she wasn't defending her empire. She was reshaping it. That evening, when Callista returned home, the house felt lighter somehow. She climbed the stairs, still half bracing herself for the emptiness that usually waited. Instead, she found Astrid in her room sitting cross-legged on the floor with her tablet propped up. On the screen, Oliver was holding up his beloved stuffed triceratops, and Astrid was patiently teaching it the alphabet in ASL. The two children giggled in bursts of silent joy, their hands flying the kind of happiness that didn't need sound to fill a room. When Astrid noticed her mother standing in the doorway, she signed, quickly, excitement blazing in her eyes. Mom, Elias invited us camping next month. Real camping with tents and stars. Can we go, please? Callista hesitated only for a moment before signing back steady and sure. Yes, we can go. For the first time in years, the answer hadn't come from guilt or compromise. It came from a genuine yes. 2 days later, another message from Elias lit up her phone. Oliver's school is hosting an art show Friday. He'd love Astrid to be there. You're both welcome, no pressure. Friday. Of course. She had a dinner booked with a client whose contract was worth millions. The old Callista wouldn't have blinked before sending a polite decline. Business always came first. But this time, she didn't even flinch. She handed the event to her CFO and texted Elias back. We'll be there. That Friday evening, she stood in the crowded school gymnasium, the air buzzing with parents and children, finger-painted posters taped to walls, the floor scuffed from sneakers and years of basketball games. Oliver dragged Astrid by the hand to show her his painting, 2 houses connected by a rainbow bridge. It's our houses, he signed proudly, so we can visit each other anytime. Astrid lit up her hands, flying with laughter. Callista stood behind them, a lump forming in her throat. I haven't done this in a long time, she admitted quietly to Elias, who was watching his son glow beside her daughter. Being close to someone, letting anyone in, neither have I. Elias said, his voice low, eyes on her, vulnerable. But maybe we can figure it out. Together. And for once, Callista didn't feel like running. Yosemite was nothing like the glass towers and boardrooms that had defined Callista's life. Out here, the air was sharp with pine and earth, and the mountains rose like ancient sentinels, unmoved by time or ambition. For 4 days, there was no cell service, no buzzing phones, no endless crises. Just the 4 of them and the wilderness. Callista, predictably, was a disaster with the tent. The poles twisted, the canvas sagged, and by the time she thought she'd figured it out, Astrid and Oliver were already giggling from inside their perfectly pitched shelter. Elias never teased, he just watched, patient, amused, stepping in only when she finally sighed and admitted defeat. Cooking wasn't any better. She somehow managed to burn water over the campfire. Oliver signed in wide-eyed disbelief. How is that even possible? Your mom has special talents. Elias laughed, his voice echoing through the canyon, rich and unguarded. But amidst the failures, something else grew. Around the fire, Elias taught them how to track stars, how to listen for owls, how to read the forest like a storybook. Astrid absorbed everything, her hands mimicking his gestures, her eyes brighter than Callista had ever seen them. On the 3rd night after the children had drifted off in their sleeping bags, soft breathing mingling with cricket songs, Callista and Elias sat by the fading fire. Above them, the Milky Way stretched wide, every star sharp and impossibly close. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Callista surprised herself. My husband loved camping, she said quietly, the words tasting bittersweet on her tongue. She rarely mentioned him, had locked those memories away because they hurt too much to touch. He wanted to bring Astrid when she was older, teach her to love the outdoors. He had a whole plan, every national park by the time she turned 18. After he died, I couldn't do any of it. It was too much, too raw. Elias didn't rush to fill the silence. He simply reached across and took her hand warm and steady against the cool mountain air. But you're doing it now, he said softly. His eyes searched hers, not demanding, not pitying, just present. With me. With you, she echoed, and for once the words didn't feel heavy, they felt right. And under that endless wilderness sky, with the ancient trees as witnesses, Elias leaned in and kissed her. It was gentle, patient, a promise, not a conquest. A beginning, not a rush. For the first time in years, Callista let herself believe that maybe the life she'd buried in grief could still bloom again. When they returned from Yosemite, something fundamental had shifted. The house that once echoed with silence now rang with laughter. Oliver began calling Astrid his almost sister, and Astrid filled page after page of her sketchbook with drawings of the four of them together, a family she had only ever dreamed of. Callista carried that change into her work. She hired deaf architects, introduced visual protocols in board meetings, and launched the company's boldest development project, yet a partnership with a consortium of deaf-owned businesses. What Marcus once called her distraction was now her greatest strength, turning Morgan Enterprises into a model of inclusive design. 3 months later, at the Sign Language Center's annual celebration, Callista stood before a crowd of families. Her hands moved with fluid ease, her voice confident, her signing graceful. 8 months ago, she signed. I walked in here lost. I thought I was only bringing my daughter to learn. Instead, I found a community. I found my voice in silence. I found my daughter again, not the quiet shadow I thought I had to protect, but the brilliant light she has always been. And I found love. The room erupted in a wave of silent applause, dozens of hands fluttering in the air like leaves in a joyful wind. 6 months after that, on a bright Saturday morning, the center was buzzing with children when Elias suddenly dropped to one knee. Astrid and Oliver appeared behind him holding a banner painted in uneven letters, "Say yes." Elias signed his proposal slowly, carefully, his hands trembling just enough to betray how much it mattered. Callista's answer was messy and perfect spoken and signed laughing and crying all at once. When she finally formed the sign for yes, the room exploded in celebration. Families surrounded them, their hands waving in shimmering applause, as if the entire world was rooting for this second chance at love. They were married the following spring in the botanical gardens beneath cherry blossoms that rained petals like blessings. Astrid and Oliver stood proudly as witnesses while Callista signed a poem, "Families are gardens growing stronger when planted together." And in that moment, under a canopy of blossoms, Callista realized she had finally stepped out of her fortress of grief. She hadn't just rebuilt her life, she had built something new. 5 years slipped by in what felt like a series of ordinary miracles. Astrid grew into herself confident, outspoken, a young woman no longer defined by silence but empowered by it. She became an advocate for deaf children, speaking at events, organizing peer groups, showing others that a voice didn't have to come from vocal cords to change the world. Oliver found his gift in art. His canvases captured the unspoken, turning movement and gesture into colors and forms that felt alive. Critics called his work visual conversations exhibitions, where silence became louder than any sound. Callista, once feared in boardrooms for her cold precision, became celebrated as a pioneer of inclusive leadership. Her TED Talk, leading in all languages, went viral, her message spreading far beyond real estate that true communication meant learning to see, to feel, to adapt. Elias, meanwhile, built a design firm specializing in universal communication, shaping spaces where no one would ever feel left out. On Astrid's graduation day, the auditorium held its breath as she stepped up as valedictorian. She delivered her speech in ASL, translated aloud by an interpreter, her hands painting poetry in the air. "The woman who taught me to find my voice." Astrid signed, eyes glistening as she turned to her mother, never made a sound. She showed me that love needs no words, only the willingness to learn each other's language. In the front row, Oliver signed his pride so vigorously that a few students laughed through their tears. Elias held Callista's hand, both of them crying, openly unashamed. "That's our daughter," he whispered. And Callista loved that there was no qualifier, no distinction of blood, just theirs, entirely. After the ceremony, Marcus Henderson approached. His once arrogant presence was gone, replaced with humility. "You were right," he said simply. "My grandson is deaf. I never understood. Until now." "Bring him Saturday morning," Callista replied. "We'll be there." And they always were. It had become their rhythm of life, teaching, mentoring, giving back. Elias leading classes. Callista supporting Astrid, guiding younger children. Oliver painting murals of hands in motion. One afternoon, a young couple arrived with their daughter, shy and uncertain. Before Callista could even step forward, Astrid knelt down, smiling, showing the little girl how her hands could sing, how they could tell stories, how they could build bridges. Callista turned to the parents, her voice calm but certain. "It's going to be okay. Better than okay. Your daughter will open a world you never knew existed." And as if on cue, Astrid gathered a group of children, starting an impromptu signing choir. 20 hands rose in harmony, creating poetry in the air, while Oliver added artistic flourishes, conducting like a maestro of silence. Callista looked around her at Elias, at Astrid, at Oliver, at the families they had built around themselves, and signed, "I love you." "We love you too," they replied in unison, their hands moving together strong and sure. The stars began to appear overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss at Yosemite, their wedding under cherry blossoms, their long journey from broken fragments to wholeness. "Ready to go home?" Elias asked as the night drew in. Astrid swept her arms wide, signing with certainty, "We are home." And she was right. Home was never a place, it was understanding. Not perfect communication, but perfect acceptance. Tomorrow, Astrid would leave for Gallaudet University to train as a teacher. Oliver would head to Cal Arts to pursue his vision of painting the unspoken. Life would change again as it always did. But tonight they were just 4 people who had found each other against all odds. A family rebuilt from pieces stronger because of the cracks. Fluent finally in the only language that mattered, love. If you were in this situation, would you be willing to learn the language of someone you love? Even if it's hard, just so you never miss a conversation with them. Don't stop here. Discover more heart-touching stories in the Best of Prime Tales playlist, where every video warms the heart and inspires hope.